I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show.
Lots of good questions, and I don't think I gave the answers people were expecting. But should one be an entrepreneur or an employee? Sometimes the answer is not quite so obvious. If you have a great idea, should you do a book or a podcast? Again, I don't think I gave the answer the person was expecting. And what's the role of mentors in your life? These questions and more. Enjoy the episode. How are you?
Good.
What have you been doing today? I've been working on the 4th generation of edits for my book.
That's cool.
Yeah, so what people usually don't realize is that you finish a book and you're all happy and you send it off to the editor, and then you work on that, you rewrite, you come up with new ideas, you have a whole next generation of the book, and then you send it off, you're very proud, and she sends it back 2 weeks later, and there's a whole new generation of edits that you have to make and changes and so on. And so now I just finished the 4th generation of edits. Each time I think to myself, this is it, this is done. But then this is the good thing about having a good editor. She makes changes and suggestions, and I realized, oh yeah, this could be a little bit more clear. This is a good change. So I just finished the 4th generation of edits for my next book called Skip the Line, coming out next March. Very happy. Good to see everybody here. So I want to point out something. I made a kind of a joke on Twitter. Not really a joke, it's actually true. If you ever had a corporate job, I don't even know, you've never had a corporate job, I don't think. Not once in your life, right? Like you started your hair salon when you were very young. Yeah. You built it up to 70 employees in Austin, Texas. You sold it, then you started moving to Africa and China and Kuwait and so on. So you're so lucky. You've never had a corporate job. For anyone, a lot of people say, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur, or oh, I want to be a writer. I want to get out of the corporate grind. You know what people really want to escape? And this is the truth, that what you really want to escape is nobody wants to shit next to their boss. It's a true story. Like when I was at a corporate job, I worked at HBO. On my floor, there were about 200 cubicles. So we're all in these cubicles. It's like each cubicle has a little cluster of cubicles. So around my cubicle, there were 6 other cubicles. And then you're in these clusters of 6 or 8 cubicles. And there's one bathroom for the entire floor. So you go to the bathroom and there's like maybe 5 stalls for 200 people and, or 100 people, half men, half women. But my boss's boss, his boss, and his boss, we were all on the same floor. So the odds were, if I went to the bathroom at 2 p.m., a reasonable time after lunch, that my boss might also be, like if I went to the bathroom every day at 2 p.m., once a week, I'd probably run into one of my bosses in the bathroom. And that is the worst. Can you just picture it? You've never had a corporate job, but just picture it. Can you imagine?
I don't really want to picture it.
But can you imagine? Okay, try to picture it. That's the problem. Try to picture it. Do something that makes you a little uncomfortable in life. Can you picture shitting next to your boss? So you're both in the stalls next to each other and just making all those sounds. Like, have you ever actually?
I'm not going to answer any questions about.
Have you ever shat in a public place?
I'm just not going to answer.
Okay, but this though.
I'm just not going to answer.
No, this is nothing. Have you ever shat in a public place?
I'm not going to talk about it.
All right, well, it's worse. It's like, imagine shitting in Port Authority in New York City. Okay, there's maybe like some homeless people next to you and then some other guy and occasionally somebody, I don't know, whatever. And but it's much worse because now it's all people you know. If it's not your boss, it's your coworkers. But again, if it's your boss and then you have to face them later, like, oh, hey, Bob, like, I just heard all the worst noises nobody should ever hear on the planet. And now we're going over this Excel spreadsheet. That's the real reason people don't want a corporate job.
Okay.
And then everybody goes on Twitter and says, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur is hard. Like, yes, there's a lot of benefits to being an entrepreneur. But when you're an employee, here's the great thing about being an employee at a corporate job. You just have one boss. And you kind of have an easy job to do. Like most people who work corporate jobs, you're not really being paid enough to kill yourself for work. Right. Okay, you have your little job. Like when I worked a corporate job, I had to write some software. I wrote the software in a day, 2 days, and then my job was to maintain it. So I really had like no work to do for a year other than to maintain this software that never broke down. But they couldn't let me leave because what if the software broke down after I left? So a corporate job has good things going for it, but two major problems. Shitting next to your boss and your coworkers, don't have to respond. And the other thing is you don't really make what you're worth. Like let's say you create $1 million in value for your job. Okay. Like if someone created $1 million, let's say you had your business, you had a hair salon business. Mm-hmm. Let's say one of your employees created $1 million in value for you. How much money would they make?
Well, it just depends on what sort of deal we, set up with them. I mean, they're all different.
But like, let's just say on average.
50%. So
they would make like $500,000.
Right.
So if you're at a corporate job, and so my first corporate job, my salary was $27,200. And I got one raise a year later. I got a raise from $27,200 to $27,800. And then I worked at HBO and I got a raise there to $40,000. So I thought I was rich on that salary in New York City. Mm-hmm. I couldn't even afford to live in the city. I shared an apartment with Elias, who was a chess hustler in Washington Square Park. We lived in a room just like this, actually. I slept on the couch. No, I slept on the foam futon. He slept on the couch, and we were like almost as close as you and I are right now. And we were like adults. He was like 30. I was 27. Mm-hmm. And that's all I could afford in New York City. I was paying $300 a month, which he stole. He never paid any rent, and we were eventually kicked out. But anyway, there's two reasons to quit your job. One is really three, but I'll talk about two. One is you don't want to shit next to your boss. That's the worst. And it's embarrassing and it's horrible. And I ruined my life because from 8 a.m. till 6 p.m., I would just hold it in. Like I would refuse to go to the bathroom unless I ran downstairs and across the street. There was the New York Public Library. I went 4 stories down and I found a bathroom that I don't think anyone had used in probably 170 years. Like Alexander Hamilton was the last person to use this bathroom and then me, because it was like in the rare books collection. And that's the only way I would go, but I would have to have the time. So that's one reason you should leave your job. The other reason, which everyone has figured out during this pandemic, is that a job is not stable. All of these people thought they had a stable job. 1 out of 3 employees, 1 out of 3 in the U.S. This has never happened before. 1 out of 3 people were laid off. So they were furloughed they were fired, they were moved to part-time or whatever, no matter what, their job was not stable. And if, your job wasn't your income wasn't necessarily stable if you're an entrepreneur either. But, the point I was making though about your employee who brings in $1 million of value and she gets paid or he gets paid $500,000, I shouldn't have assumed your hairstylists who were working for you were all women. Maybe you had some men, some gay men, but, was it true? If they were men, were they straight or gay?
Well, what does it matter? I mean, I don't know. They were all different.
I'm just curious.
They were all different. Some were, some weren't.
All right. And you don't know a percentage?
No.
All right. Fair enough. I'm making assumptions all over the place. It is wrong to make assumptions. That is just bad behavior. I've just been #canceled everywhere. So, but I didn't mean it. I was just saying.
No, I just never.
But anyway, a good employee who brings in $1 million of value in an entrepreneurial business makes $500,000 potentially. But if you made $40,000 a year at your job, not only is your salary not stable, but let's say I brought in $1 million of value for HBO, and probably I brought in millions and millions more, maybe tens of millions of value for HBO. My salary doesn't change because here's all the people who need, of every dollar I bring into the business, here's all the people who need to take a piece of that dollar. And they all have to take bigger pieces than me because they all have higher status than me. So my boss at HBO, his boss, his name was Bruce, his boss, Rob, his boss, Albie, his boss, Bill, his boss, Jeff, his boss, Jerry, and then his boss, which is the board of directors of Time Warner, and then their boss, which is the shareholders of Time Warner. So they all have to take their piece of that value. And then if there's anything left over, I would get the 1/100th of a penny of every dollar of value I brought in that was left over. So that's why in a company that had tens of millions, maybe $1 billion in profits, I would make such a small salary no matter how much value I was bringing. So eventually I had to start just to make a living, I had to start doing side hustles. I started building websites for other people. I had to turn that into a business. And then eventually the business got big enough and I didn't want to leave HBO. My dream was not to do a business. I don't like running a business. My dream was to make TV shows. I was pitching 2 TV shows to HBO. One was called 3 a.m. The other was called Blind Date. But eventually I had to leave because I had to run my business. My business at this point had over a dozen employees. We had office space. We were growing. And I used to change into my suit in my cubicle, run outside, go across the street to JP Morgan, pitch them, oh, you guys need a website, take my suit off, go back to the cubicle and play online chess all day. That was my job because I didn't have that much work to do. So while I was, and then at night I would do my 3 a.m. project. But, so anyway, I pointed out that on Twitter that this is a big reason to quit your job. So you don't have to go to the bathroom next to people. I'll stop using the word shitting. So this is a big reason to quit your job. And somebody always asks, like it's so funny over the years how people ask the exact same questions word for word. So someone asked, and I have it right up here, that if everyone thought the way you think, then the world would be ruined, right? And that's the question everyone always asks. And the answer is, first off, no. Why do you care if everyone else in the world thought this way? Like, are you saying everybody needs to work in a factory or else the world will be over? And second, not everyone is going to think this way, right? That's the reason why there's so many people at corporate jobs. And another person says, oh, well, it's easy to say if you've got money. I didn't have any money when I quit my job. My salary was $40,000 a year in New York City. So $40,000 a year, your take-home pay is $2,500 a month. And on $2,500 a month, you can't afford anything in New York City. A cab ride from uptown to downtown is like $80. The average apartment in New York, in Manhattan, at least for rent, is like $4,000 or $5,000 rent. It's horrible. New York City is the worst. Eating lunch was $15 for a sandwich and like maybe a bag of chips. Yeah. And so dinner is like $60. Going on a date is like $150. Like I couldn't afford anything ever. So I would just, I don't know. My daily activity was I'd go to this pool hall in Astoria, in Astoria. I'm going to stereotype again, but in Astoria, a lot of Greek people live there. And they had their special kind of coffee, like very strong coffee. And in Greece, there's 3 types of backgammon, and we just play backgammon all night for no money. We just have fun. And that was maybe, until I met you, that was like the best time of my life. Aww. Being dirt poor, living on a foam futon, going to Astoria, and just playing with these Greek people. We would play chess and these 3 types of backgammon, and we would just play all night long till like 6 a.m. and then I'd go to work again. And on the weekends, I'd occasionally sleep. And because I had the HBO ID, I was able to go in Astoria. There was the Museum of the Moving Image. So I would watch these movie festivals every weekend for free. Like you could get in for free. Actually, with the HBO card, you get into any museum, you get into anything for free. But I would go to this movie theater. Right. So the point is that when you're stuck at a job, the value you create is not the value you take home. And when you're an entrepreneur, even a small entrepreneur, even if you're doing a side hustle, the value you create, you get to take home. If you were having a wedding and you wanted to have a photographer, and I said, look, everybody's charging you $40,000 to photograph your wedding. I'll charge you $5,000. And they'll say, what experience do you have? And I'll say, experience, I'm charging you 1/8 of what everybody else is charging. Who cares? I can use the phone on my iPhone. I can use the camera on my iPhone, and I'm charging you $5,000. You know what? $4,000. And I get to keep 100% of the value I create. I can say $4,000 plus pay for my cab ride to your wedding. And then here's how you photograph a wedding. You make sure you get the couple in lots of different situations. You make sure you get every family member. You make sure you get every friend with the couple. You make sure you get people talking before, during, and after. You take a video of the wedding itself. So you take snapshots, stills from the video, and then you have thousands of photos. And then you create a little website. It's the photo website for the wedding. I've never even taken a photograph practically, but I could like photograph a wedding for $4,000, no problem. But the point is, you get to keep 100% of the value you create. So if I grow marijuana in my backyard, costs me almost nothing, but I could sell it to you for, I don't know, whatever marijuana goes for, $100 for a bag of gummy bears or whatever, or joints or whatever they cost. So, and then I get to keep 100% of the value. It's not like I'm working for a marijuana company where I'm making $12 an hour and I get to keep that. So that's the main reason. And yeah.
And I like the freedom too.
Yeah, the freedom. But you lose a lot of freedom because again, when you're an entrepreneur, you can't leave your work in the office. Like when I worked at HBO, I would leave the work in the office. I'd go to Astoria and it was so freeing and relaxing. It was like every day was like the last day of high school where it's just, I had nothing to do. My work was at the office. I didn't have homework and I would play backgammon all night and drink coffee with these funny people. I always missed, this is why I got obsessed with poker after I sold my first company, is that I love the idea of playing a game and sitting around and bantering with a bunch of people who are just insulting each other and they were funny. Yeah. So it's just, I loved, did you ever have that moment where it's just like you go someplace every day and it's just all the girls and guys and you just are hanging out. There's no agenda. Right. You're just hanging out and making fun of each other and having fun.
Right. No, it's great. But I had freedom. I mean, in the beginning, before I had the salon and employees, I worked for myself. It was just me.
Yeah.
So I was able to leave and just be free.
Right, but then
there's different sorts of entrepreneurship.
Right, but that's a good point. That's a good point, though. But let me ask you this: like when I left HBO to start or to join the business that I had started 18 months earlier. I did not leave HBO until I had been at my business for 18 months. That's how risk averse I was. And also that's how much I wanted to make a TV show. But but don't you feel like your customers then are your bosses? Your employees are your bosses because, your employees, they're very important. You have to cater to their needs. You have to make sure they're developing and growing and advancing in life. And you have to give them things to do. So they're your bosses. Your partners and investors are your bosses. You didn't have investors, but your partners and investors become your bosses. Like what happened last month? You were
Right.
$10 down on your growth. We
Right.
want growth every month. Like when I was running a hedge fund, I had about 20 investors, and there was one period where I was up for them. I made the money 14 months in a row. On the 15, I had never heard from them. On the 15th month, I lost money. Every single investor called me and said, should we be worried? Like, what's going on? Are you in trouble? Is this a scam? I was down 0.5%. I was down 0.4% that month. But they call you. They're like, should I remove my money? Like, you have to then kiss their asses and pander to them. So your investors are your bosses, your employees are your bosses, your customers are your bosses, your shareholders are your bosses. It's almost like I could never leave work at work. I was suddenly from that moment, and I'll tell you the day, it was September 1st, 1997. From September 1st, 1997, forever after, no matter how much money I had or didn't have, when I was going broke, when I made money, I was never free again. I was more free at the corporate job than being an entrepreneur.
This is an interesting point because when I worked for myself and it was just me, of course, when my clients are there, right, I work for them and I want to make them happy.
And you have to win new clients too.
And you win new clients, but the best thing is to keep your old clients happy, right?
Yes.
The new clients will come, but just make sure your clients are happy. And it is hard. And the more you charge for a service, the more they're going to expect the service to be, good, really good. But the thing is that I set boundaries with my clients. So I
did not.
So it makes, life is a lot easier when you set boundaries with everything. You set boundaries with your friends, you set boundaries with your family, you set boundaries with your kids, and you set boundaries for your clients.
No.
Well, that's just,
I was just trying to set boundaries. Yeah. I was practicing.
But I mean, it makes life so much easier because then you don't have that feeling of, oh my gosh, they're going to call me. Oh, they want me to go. Oh, okay, I'll go. No, I'm not going to do that. These are my hours. And then, they know what to expect. And that's how I've always
Maybe that's why, but this is an important thing. There's a lot of
Yeah.
subtleties to being an entrepreneur, to running a business. Maybe this is what made me so unhappy as an entrepreneur is that, yes, so a couple of things. One is, maybe I didn't put the right boundaries in. So if a client called me at 3 a.m, and this would happen, clients would call me at 3 a.m, crying because they were unhappy at their jobs and asking for my advice. And I would help them out. Like I would talk to them at 3 a.m. because I would always, you do make a good point though. Your best new customers, this is such an important point about entrepreneurship. Your best new customers are your old customers.
That's right.
So if I needed to make more money, I wouldn't try to find a new client. I would call the old clients first, or the current clients, and I say, is there more services we could do for you? Do you need a logo to me? Do you need some software to be written? Do you need me to just run errands for you? Like I was willing to do anything for these clients.
Wow.
So do you need a girlfriend or a boyfriend? I was doing that for my clients too. And that would lock in the clients for life. Believe me, I've set up more customers with girlfriends or boyfriends than I'm not a matchmaker, but I would do it pretty regularly.
Wow.
Just want to see if we're getting comments or if this is frozen. I don't know. Can you guys see me? Hear me? Do we have things happening? Is life happening? So yeah, I agree. Setting boundaries is important. So, but this is why, because I did not enjoy entrepreneurship so much, I think it's very important to realize, you got to make a lot more money as an entrepreneur. And in order to justify not just sitting in a cubicle surfing the web all day, doing nothing. The average person at work, they've done a study, the average person in a 9-to-5 job works 2 hours and 53 minutes. So a day. So that's hardly anything. If you're an entrepreneur, you're working on an 8-hour workday, you're working 27 hours. So you never, you never actually get free from the grind. But so you have to make sure if you make money, you enjoy it, but it doesn't rule you. Like you have to the key is to put as much money in the bank and not to be stingy, not to squander it, like spend on the things you enjoy, but you never want to get to a point, and I'm afraid I got too much to this point even after I had money. Once money starts to control you because you're spending too much and you have to maintain a certain lifestyle and you have to maintain a certain persona, which nobody really cares about except you, you become a slave to the money, and then you have to make more, and then you take more risks, and that's how I would go broke every time. So now I try to make sure I'm not a slave to the money.
Yeah.
So let's see if Jay has sent me the question of the day. I do want to talk about. Okay, good question. What do I think? If you're a writer, what do I think about having should you have a ghostwriter? And the answer is, a lot of people will say no, but the answer is absolutely you should have a ghostwriter. Let's just look at the average nonfiction book. Let's say you're writing a book about sales. You're the best salesperson in the world. And every time you go into a sales meeting, you close that sale. So you want to write a book about sales to share your experience, and then you'll make more money. You'll maybe get a bigger job as a salesperson. You'll give talks. You'll have a podcast. You'll make more money in other ways. But you need to write that book to show, because people associate writing books with expertise. You need to show you're an expert in sales and you want to tell your story. But you're not a writer. The reason you're not a writer is because you've spent your whole adult life getting really, really good at sales. It's really hard. And you've devoted your life to reading books about sales, going on sales meetings, following up on sales, getting really good at sales. It takes a long, long time to be a good writer. You have to write. I wrote, in the early 90s, I wrote 4 novels and dozens of short stories. None of them were good. They were horrible. They were the worst things ever. If I read them out loud right now, I would be so embarrassed, I would shoot myself at the end of it. And it took me a long time to be even a decent writer, and now I'm still trying to be a good writer. So, yes, if you have something important you want to say and you feel a book is the way to do it, and I highly encourage everybody to write a book, then get yourself a ghostwriter. If you feel you're not a good writer, if you're satisfied with your writing ability for what you want to do, then by all means write it. But if you don't have the time, and if you don't feel like you're a good writer, get a ghostwriter. Or here's an advice I gave to a friend of mine, and I'm working with this friend of mine later today. Dictate your book into a recorder, or dictate an outline. And then there are plenty of people you can hire dictate your whole book into your recorder, get a transcript of the dictation, give it to an editor / ghostwriter, and boom, within a few weeks, he'll turn it into a book. And again, within 30 or 40 days of you dictating your book out loud into a recorder, you will have a book. You can self-publish it. You can call yourself, Magnificent Sales Publishing. And, on Amazon, Magnificent Sales Publishing just published this guy's book. You'll self-publish. Everyone will say, oh, he's got the best publisher. I've heard of Magnificent Sales Publishing. You don't know how many times you make up a name and you say it to people, and people are like, oh, yeah, I've heard of that. That's a great publisher.
Yeah.
And so this is not scrolling. I just want to see how we can scroll a little bit better. I know people are there, but now, here we go. Magic.
Oh, wow.
We're scrolling. So yes. So don't be afraid. Don't let other people be your mirrors. Too often we let people be the mirror. Like, I look into a mirror and I see something back. I'm making the right decision. I'm not making the right decision. So a lot of people will say, you can't use a ghostwriter, or don't think you can write a book and not put in the time to be a good writer. Or, if you use a ghostwriter, it's not going to be good. Who cares? Very few people are going to read your book anyway, but you wrote a book.
Right.
So
when you're getting your message out too.
You're getting your message out. You're getting an opportunity. Like, let's say the TED conference is looking for speakers, and they have 2 choices. The person who wrote a book and the person who didn't write a book. They pick the person who wrote a book. Mm-hmm. This is the expert. They don't ask you, well, did you use a ghostwriter? Because we really need to know. They won't know. They will not know. They're not going to ask you who published it. Oh, Magnificent Sales Publishing published it. Or you could say, Goldman Brown published it. You know Goldman Brown, right? And they're like, yeah, I've heard of them. They're like, I've heard of them, definitely. Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. So here's someone who says, it's a big Instagram name. Meki Bosch, Alan Duramia. She says, I would love to write my own book of my testimony of being adopted and how my experience is better, a book or a podcast. It's a really good question. So you have an experience about being adopted and you want to write about your experience. And I'm assuming, by the way, your experience is somewhat unique from the other million people each year who are adopted. So you want to express, maybe you tell your story and you interweave advice to adopted kids, adopted parents, people who deal with adopted people, to people who are considering adoption. And you ask a book or a podcast. The answer is, of course, and you said it already, you have to do both. Not only you do a book, and by the way, dictate the book, get a ghostwriter, or write it yourself. And by the way, you don't have to sell it to a major publisher or an agent. Don't do that. If this is your first book, write a 30-page book of your experiences and self-publish it on Amazon. Wait for your next book to get a publisher. I sometimes use a publisher and I sometimes self-publish. Let me tell you my experience. Right now, I'm using for my next book, I'm using a mainstream publisher, HarperCollins. And 6 months ago, I had the idea. I went to lunch with an agent. She said, let's do it. 2 or 3 months later, we had a proposal worked out. She set up meetings. A month later, we did all the meetings. She had a little bit of an auction. And then, then I had to write the book. Then there's edits. The book's not coming out now till next March. So from beginning to beginning, from beginning to end, it's a little over a year for your book to come out. And by the way, when you publish with a mainstream publisher, you need to give them 60,000 words or 250 pages. They need to get it into bookstores because they're not really sure how to market other than the usual distribution. So self-publishing almost always will get you smaller advances, but advances are going down anyway. And self-publishing will make you more money. Amazon, you get to keep 70% of the revenues. When you publish a book in publishing, you keep, 15% of the revenues, maybe less. So depending if you use an agent or not. So don't think that the definition of a book is 60,000 words, 250 pages. I know people who write a book that's 10 pages and they self-publish on Amazon. You all know probably Kamal Ravikant, a good friend of ours. He wrote an excellent book, a bestseller, Love Yourself as If Your Life Depends on It. A new version came out recently, but his original version, written in 2010, had 8,000 words in it. That's like 20 or 30 pages. So the definition of a book changes when you self-publish. The definition of everything has changed in this new world. The definition of a restaurant is not a location, but a menu. The definition of a book is, any words that you want to publish on Amazon. The definition of a podcast, I could just record something, upload it to a podcast distribution site, and now I have a podcast. The definition of a TV show is I could take this video, put it on YouTube. I'm calling that a TV show. You know what? I could even load this on Amazon. I could load this video, this IG Live. We could load this on Amazon, call it, Days of Our Lives with James and Robin. And that'll be a series on Amazon. And it'll look, if you search on Amazon for Days of Our Lives, it will look like every other TV show in the search results. Oh, Days of Our Lives. This must have been coming out with a major TV studio. And you can essentially self-publish a TV series on Amazon. Most people don't know that. I have a friend, Nick Nanton. He's won Academy Awards for documentaries. And he made a documentary about Rudy. You know the movie Rudy? So Rudy was a movie about this kid who plays for Notre Dame in the very last play of his 4-year education. And he became an inspirational figure. So Nick did a documentary about the real life Rudy. Well, he couldn't find a network to pick it up. So he just uploaded it to Amazon and he's made just as much money doing that as if he had done it through NBC. Yeah. And if you search for Rudy, 2 things come up. Mm-hmm. Rudy the movie and Rudy his documentary. And you can't tell any difference between the two. Wow. So I don't understand why most people don't just self-create a TV series or a movie or whatever it is you want to do. Like, you don't have to use YouTube. We could take this we probably should do this, actually. We should take all our IG Lives, make a series on Amazon, And boom, check out our series on Amazon. It's on Amazon. Who
Yeah, and we
produced
can
it?
like dress up in like, period costumes, like drunk, what is it, drunk?
Like drunk history?
History.
We could do drunk IG.
Yeah.
Drunk Q&A. High Q&A. I don't know which one I would prefer. Drunk Q&A or high Q&A. So, okay, going to go to the next question. But yes, you should use a ghostwriter if you want. Trick to getting more podcast followers. So, by the way, I want to answer the question first. I want to continue answering the question of the person who is adopted, wants to write about her experience. Should she do a book or a podcast? The answer is what I call the spoken wheel approach. I've spoken about here before. You being adopted is the wheel. That's the core, your core story that you want to tell. Now, you have spokes. You should use as many spokes as possible. You write a book. You do a podcast. Maybe you interview other adopted people.
Yeah.
You do an online newsletter. Here's resources for parents who want to adopt, or here's resources for kids who are adopted. So a new newsletter comes out every week. And then you on Quora, you go on Quora and you answer questions about what it's like to be adopted, and you link always to your newsletter. To see more about this topic, subscribe to my free newsletter. And then maybe you have here's a business. Someone reads your free newsletter about adoption, and now they're convinced they want to adopt. And then you introduce them to lawyers who will help you adopt, and you get a referral fee. And then suddenly now you have a business that comes out of your free newsletter. Or maybe you advertise lawyers and adoption services in your newsletter. Two different business models that maybe you give your book away for free, you do your podcast for free, you give away your newsletter for free. But now I just gave you two multi-million-dollar business models. People do make millions as adoption referral services. Now you do maybe an online course, how to adopt, or how to be adopted, or how to find your natural parents, or whatever. Now you give TED Talks. Now you give talks to companies like how to treat your employees who are adopted. I don't know.
And those spokes, don't they become organic too? As you start, you put one foot in front of the other, and as you move forward, then things happen and doors open, and I think it's pretty cool.
Absolutely, because let's say you're doing your online newsletter about the experience of being adopted, and you get like hundreds of the same question. Well, that suggests, I should make a course around this question. So my newsletter is for free, but for $60, you can get my online course about how to find your ideal adopted choice or whatever. So stuff does happen organically.
Right. And then sometimes, when you do a business plan or when you do something like this, it sort of puts you in a box sometimes. You need a business plan to understand where you're going or where you want to go. But sometimes a business plan may not be so great, or, you need to have it loose so that you can grow into a direction that may not be where you think you're going to go, right?
Right. Well, we had a business idea a few months ago. We called it, so I'll share this. We called it Tip Jar. And so the idea is that most people in social media, YouTubers, tweeters, Instagrammers, most YouTubers, for instance, don't have millions of followers, so they can't monetize their YouTube channel. But sometimes if you don't have many followers, you can still have a YouTube video that goes viral and gets millions of views, but you can't monetize it because you didn't have enough followers to monetize, to get any advertisers. So how does that person monetize? Well, if everybody had a tip jar, the average person could tip them. And we thought we could build a business model around this. And instead we had idea sex between that idea and another idea. And now we're working on the other idea. So another idea that we had that we used idea sex. I'm wearing pajamas right now. And for the past 3.5 weeks, it's about 17 days. About 24 days. The past 3.5 weeks, I've only worn pajamas. I've not worn regular street clothes at all. And I've gone outside. We've gone out to eat. We went to the protests. We went out to a restaurant last night for the first time in our new neighborhood, our brand new neighborhood.
So,
and I've been wearing pajamas the entire time. And so my point is, pajamas are the most comfortable clothes. Why do we ever not wear pajamas? Why would we choose to change out of the clothes that we sleep in? That's how comfortable they are. Why would we choose to change out of our pajamas to wear like a suit and a tie and Spanx and whatever? I don't wear Spanx, but whatever. But Spanx are those things. Sarah Blakely's been on my podcast. It's those things that like tighten up your waist or whatever. But why would we choose to wear anything but pajamas? So I wanted to create a fashion line of outerwear that's pajamas, and you put a little designs on it to make it look like outerwear and feel a little bit more like outerwear, but it's the comfort of pajamas. And then you wanted to do stuff with copper because the antiviral properties of copper. So we thought, okay, let's make copper infused pajamas and make a whole fashion line out of that. So who knows? Maybe that's an idea. Another idea that we were working on a few months ago. And by the way, when you're an idea machine, when you write down 10 ideas a day, I have no problem sharing these ideas because most of these ideas we're never going to work on, but they're all fun. And maybe for a day or two, I think I'm going to work on them. But I was playing Cards Against Humanity with our kids, and it was fun. It was okay. And then I was thinking, oh, what if you take all of Trump's tweets and call it Trump versus the world, and you make a version of Cards Against Humanity and call it Trump versus the world, where you have situations like, oh no, there's a pandemic in Wuhan, and then everybody throws down the Trump tweet, and the judge of that round decides which is the funniest or the most applicable or whatever. So that's Trump versus the world, the card game. And I had the founder of Kickstarter on my podcast, so I figured, we'll do Cards Against Humanity. They started out of a Kickstarter. Mm-hmm. So, by the way, that's another spoke in the wheel. Do a Kickstarter to launch your podcast. Boom. Like everybody who's adopted, you can market it on Facebook to people who are interested in adoption, and everyone who's adopted will fund your Kickstarter to fund your podcast. So Kickstarter is always another spoke. But so that was Trump versus the world. We worked on it for like 4 days, and then we even had Sarah, our daughter, do all sorts of research on. She collected all of Trump's tweets and put them in an Excel spreadsheet by category, but we never worked on it. We never finished it. So go ahead and do it, and we'll play it. We'll be the first customer. But this is when you're saying business ideas come organically. This is what happens: is you do things, and then you have idea sex. Like, oh, Cards Against Humanity. This is kind of an easy game to make. Oh, Trump is the only thing in the news every day. Oh, Kickstarter. I'm about to have the founder of Kickstarter on my podcast, and Cards Against Humanity. They got their launch during Kickstarter, and Kickstarter is a good way to seed your initial audience. Let's combine all these ideas. Idea sex, Trump versus the world, or pajamas as outerwear. In this pandemic, we realized, it's not so important that we have to go outside every day. We were all fine, or most of us were fine sitting indoors. I'll just stay in my pajamas even when I go outside. Idea sex, copper infused. Maybe we'll even do a Kickstarter for this. We'll get that first version, design it. I kind of want pajamas with like stripes down one arm, kind of like my jacket. And you need like a zipper so you can hold like the wallet and it won't fall out. Mm-hmm. What else do you need in pajamas that are outerwear, you think? Nothing really. The zipper I realized I need because I was losing my credit card.
Yeah, you do that a lot.
Maybe like out of the side pocket, like mask, surgical mask.
Oh, there we go. Like a button that you can like get your,
Yeah, and
so
then
you always have it with you. You won't forget it.
Copper infused because we're interested in things that were antiviral, and copper, silver, gold has all these antiviral properties, but copper's the cheapest. We could do silver pajamas too, but that'd be a little more expensive. Silver fuse. Oh, and then your point is silver has to be moist in order to be antiviral. I did not know that. I want to research that a little more. Yeah. But anyway, so spoken wheel is absolutely an important part of any idea. Always view a core idea as the wheel, and then think of as many spokes as possible. So that's critical. I could keep on talking about that, but I will answer another question. So, James, did you have a good mentor that helped you at any time in your life? Yes. So, let me ask you, Robin, did you have a mentor on the hair salon business?
Yes, I did.
What was she like? How did you meet her?
I met them, I answered a job, it was an opening, and I went in and interviewed and got the job. So I was an apprentice for 2 years.
And then what happened? How are they your mentor?
Well, they taught me. I mean, you go to cosmetology school and you learn the basics, but you don't really learn anything but that, to be able to take the test. And then they taught me their way, and it was very difficult. That was a very difficult time. because they're very strict and they were very okay. So it was called Tony and Guy, and they had just come over from the UK, and they had their very first salon in Dallas, and so that's where I worked. I worked for Tony and Guy, and their brothers Anthony, and so anyway, I was there for 2 years, and it was very difficult. They expected a whole lot.
Well, what was like one of the difficult things?
Well, I had to work every, day, and I had to until the evening, into the evening, and do the same thing over and over again. I had to be perfect.
Wait, were there clients coming like all the time?
I had models, that would come in, and I would practice on them. And so, yeah, it was just, and if I didn't do it right, I had to do it over again.
Would they yell at you?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. It was not easy. And, it was a hard time, but I learned a lot. And, thankfully, they taught me everything. So they're some of the best, but then they went, and they said, well, just wait. We're going to be all over the U.S. We're going to be on fire. They told me. And sure enough, they opened up salons all over the U.S. And they also have their product line. TG is their product line. And so I was there from the very beginning, from when they started. So it was really neat. It was a great experience. And it really did help me with my business. And it was great.
What was the worst they yelled at you?
Well, they didn't yell at me. I mean, they were just, I was tired. But they kept on, and I had to keep going. A lot of people didn't survive. I mean, that was one thing. I think they just wanted to weed out people that really weren't that interested, because they were high demand, and they only wanted the best, and people that really wanted to learn. Like, were you ever afraid of them? Yes.
But why? Because they were
because
strict,
of who they were, and they were sort of like celebrities in this industry. So yes.
So you wanted to please them.
Yes.
All right, and then how did it end?
Great. I mean, I still keep in touch with them, and they've
good.
always been able to. I've always had them. I would call them with my business, for help.
Did they resent when you branched off and started your own business?
Not at all.
That's
not
key.
At all. That they were great.
I think that any good mentor wants their employees to rise up and do better than them. That's the whole idea of creating the next generation.
That's right.
Is that the next generation should stand on the shoulders of the prior generation, not stand below the prior generation.
Right. And I always trained my assistants as well the same way. I mean,
that's key.
If they don't succeed and they don't succeed me, or become more successful, I failed. I feel. I mean, I want to put into them and then let them grow.
Yeah.
And by letting them grow, they would always stay with me. But if they wanted to, move on, that was fine. But it was very rewarding for me to see that I made a difference in their work ethics and stuff. So they hopefully carried that on with them.
Yeah, and so to answer the question, I've had mentors every step of the way. So when I was in undergrad, I had a mentor, Prakash, who I co-wrote a paper with that we presented at this huge conference in Germany. I had a mentor at HBO. I had mentors at later on when I was writing about finance and going on CNBC more. Jim Cramer was a mentor. When I was in the hedge fund business, at least initially, Victor Niederhofer was a mentor, and now I'm not as much friends with him, but I'm friends with his brother, Roy. And I've had mentors every step of the way in writing. Even when I wrote Choose Yourself, wasn't quite a mentor. It was more of a peer, but I did view my friend Tucker Max. I really valued his advice, and he's professionally now has a publishing company. So he knows so much about writing. I was happy to work with him. And every step of the way, I've had mentors. I've also had virtual mentors. So I read an enormous amount about whatever I'm interested in. So when I started investing, I read so many books about Warren Buffett that I ended up writing a book about Warren Buffett, because it's very important to have what I call a plus minus equal. So a plus is your mentor. The equals are all the people who are rising up with you. So imagine all the other hairstylists who were working for Tony and Guy. They were equals. You could trade notes. You could be more comfortable talking to them about ideas. So your plus were Tony and Guy, who you would look up to. Then you have your equals that you're rising up with. Everybody rises up in a scene. You don't rise up by yourself. Like even you look at every artistic movement. Like you look at pop art. There was Andy Warhol. There was Roy Lichtenstein. There was, all the people around them. So they rose up as a scene. The beat movement in writing. There was Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, William S. Burroughs. They rose up as a scene. They had their mentors, but they rose up as a scene together. And then you have to have a minus. So if you can't explain what you're learning, if you can't teach what you're learning, then it means you don't really understand what it is that you're learning. So I was reading so much about Warren Buffett, and I had my equals as other writers and beginning hedge fund managers. And then I wrote a book about Warren Buffett to see if I can explain what I had learned about Warren Buffett. And I had a unique stance on Warren Buffett that was different from all the other books about him. But Warren Buffett was like a virtual mentor. I never met him, but I read 100 books about him, say, or that's an exaggeration, maybe 10 books about him and 100 articles or more. And, but I would say it never ended well with most of my mentors, because I think people don't like it often when you rise up. Not even rise up beyond them, but when you leave to just do your own thing, people get upset. And I understand why.
Leader,
it might be a bad leader. I understand why they wanted more of your work, but I was always moving so fast because I was so passionate about everything I was doing. I would move much faster than the average mentee. I'm not saying this is a good or bad. Maybe I should have stayed under mentors for longer, but all of them ended up having some problems with me. Although I kind of get along with all of them now, but that hasn't always been true. Sometimes there's been bitter and angry fights. So not fights on my part, fights on their part. But, so I've always had a mentor, particularly as I was growing up. I wouldn't even mind mentors now. You're never too old to have a mentor. For whatever you want to get good at, you need that plus, minus, equal. So a mentor, someone to teach you, someone to explain to, and equals that you can trade notes with. So I have a lot of equals right now, not so many mentors. But I wish I did, actually. So I would maybe my podcast guests are almost like virtual mentors for me. But in terms of nonfiction writing, someone asked me who my favorite nonfiction writer is. I have quite a few. Again, one of the smartest guys I've ever read is Matt Ridley. He was just on my podcast about his brand new book, How Innovation Works. Such a smart guy. I do like Nassim Taleb's books, but I do think he's a very strange guy in person. I don't necessarily know I want to hang out with him, but and he's been on my podcast as well. But I just saw him on he posted a picture of himself on an empty plane wearing 3 surgical masks to be extra risk averse. I think that's going a little overboard. And he just constantly argues and screams at people on Twitter, which is just such a weird thing for such a smart guy. But I do recommend his books, The Black Swan, Anti-Fragile, Fooled by Randomness, and Skin in the Game. He has another book. It's not as good. So I just finished the book, These Truths, which is a history of the U.S. by Joe Lepore. So great writer for history. I have a lot of nonfiction writers that I read. In terms of philosophy, I like this guy, Nisargadatta Maharaj, who's wrote a book called I Am That. A good nonfiction writer, our good friend Ryan Holiday, who wrote Obstacle is the Enemy, Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, Stillness is the Key, and his next book's coming out in September. I liked Susan Cain's Introvert. I could go on and on. I love tons of nonfiction books. My favorite fiction writers, Dennis Johnson, Charles Bukowski, Chuck Palahniuk, Tim O'Brien, Lori Moore, Amy Hempel, Susan Steinberg wrote a not known book of short stories called Spectacle that take place in Baltimore. So I have a lot of good favorite fiction writers. Those are all short story writers, but I have some favorite novelists too, like James Baldwin, Ernest Hemingway. Trying to think of novels that have really blown me away recently. Not as many. I think the novel is a weird form right now because literary fiction is too much MFA taught, and I should probably be a bigger genre reader, but I'm not.
I think we're living a novel right now.
Someone says Ryan Holiday is a scam. That's ridiculous. Quiet by Susan Cain is great. And you know what? I'm going to have Susan Cain on the podcast just because you said that. O. Henry for short stories. I like O. Henry. It's a little old school, but I like him. Around the same, a little bit after that, I like Celine, Journey to the End of the Night, who wrote around World War I. Okay, next question. How to build, this is a good question, which I don't know if I know how to answer. How to build friendships with people above you in the professional ladder. For example, you meet a Fortune 500 CEO and you run a tech startup, so you'd like to be better friends with someone you admire. And I deal with this all the time. Like, someone comes on my podcast and they say, and I think to myself, boy, I really like this guy. And a lot of the people on my podcast, they're professionally charming. They know how to be as charming as possible. Like if someone's an actor, they know how to win over people. And so I think by the end of the podcast, oh my gosh, is this person my new best friend? And then I call them up later, like thinking, hey friend, you want to go for a coffee? No one ever picks up. So it's not always the case. Sometimes people who have come on my podcast have become friends later, but in general, I usually never see or hear from them again.
I feel like what's really important is that, okay, well, first of all, they may not want any more friends. I don't know.
Yeah, they probably have a lot of friends.
Are very saturated with that. Okay, but two is it's important to keep in contact.
I should do that.
Thanking them for coming. Let's just say thanking them for coming on the podcast. Would love to talk to you about or meet for coffee or keep up that. And I'm trying to teach that to the kids too, like with our son. The people that he meets.
You do a really good job. Like we always introduce them to people.
Yeah, so he tries. I make sure that he keeps in contact with them so that they won't forget him, and he does it.
As an example, I had Frank Abagnale on my podcast. So you might have seen the movie. He was played by Leonardo DiCaprio. The movie was called Catch Me If You Can. I think Spielberg might have been the director. So the real Frank Abagnale came on my podcast because he was interested in cybersecurity, and so was our son John. We introduced him to John, and I don't keep in touch with Frank. John keeps in touch with him. Yeah. He's so good at that. But I do think that's good. I think Jordan Harbinger tells me what he does, which is he'll scroll through his texts and his emails, even from way back, and he'll do 4 emails a day, just reaching out and saying, hey, how's it going? Or, and I started doing that. And so for instance, when the pandemic started, I would reach out to Mark Cuban, who I've known Mark Cuban for 21 years or more than that, 23 years. And I would reach out and I would say, hey, good job. Letting the employees of the Mavericks and the stadium know that you're going to keep paying them. Hey, good. I like your ideas about when you suggested you might run for president. And so just not asking for anything, but just pointing this out, he always responded. And then finally, when he was really hinting at the presidency, I said, why don't you come on my podcast? We'll talk about it. And I'm sure everybody would love to hear your views. And he did. And we were on the podcast like that very afternoon. So that stuff works. And I do have to say, some people who I really admire and look up to have become friends. Like, I think, it's not like we hang out with them, but like Gary Kasparov is a friend now. We've hung out with him a little bit. Jim McKelvey, who started Square, I feel like he's a friend. Some of the comedians who have been on my podcast, I feel like they're friends. Some of the writers who've been on the podcast are friends. So it happens.
And people want to be around people that, make them feel good. Not necessarily, I think the real value in a friendship is how they feel when they're with you. If you're positive, and people like to be around positivity. They like to be around people that make them feel good. And I mean in a sincere way, not, like people can see through you if you're, fake and you're using them for something. You don't ever want to just friend somebody just to use them. That's wrong.
Yeah, it doesn't feel good. Like life should feel good. You should
do it,
Right. Like your heart and your mind should connect.
Right.
So something should feel good here and make sense here. So maybe someone's very charismatic, but they shoot up, methamphetamines all the time. Maybe not the best person to be a friend with, or maybe someone's good for your career, but you don't really like their personality. They're like cheating on their spouse. They're doing all these scams. Okay. Maybe it makes sense to be friends with them for some reason, for some tactical reason, but you don't like them personally. So boom. So to your point, make sure the heart and the mind connects.
And you want to be friends just to be friends because you like them.
And what I would do to really answer the question, like how do you become friends with somebody? Just make sure nobody cares about your self-worth. People only care about their own self-worth. And that sounds cynical, but it's actually the most loving thing you can do is to understand that everybody around you, the most important thing to them is their feelings of self-worth. So the way to become friends with somebody, and this is not a strategic way, it's to your point, be sincere, but make sure you acknowledge their worth. Make sure you point out to them, hey, that was good what you did. Hey, I watched what you just did. That was good. Hey, I watched that podcast. That was interesting. Hey, I saw what you wrote. That was interesting. Hey, I was just thinking about you. You've been on my mind lately because of these experiences that reminded me of things that happened to us. I wanted to touch base and see how you were doing. Always focus on their self-worth. Never try to focus on your own self-worth. Like I get emails all the time, people saying, hey, can you tweet out my book? It would be really good for me if you did that. Okay, I could say it's important to me what makes them feel good, but deep down, it's not really that important to me. What's more important to me is I want them, if I like the book, I'll tweet it out. I do that all the time. If I like them as an artist or a creator or whatever, I'll tweet out about them. If I want to be friends with them, I'll do a favor and stuff. But if someone's just reaching out cold and saying, do this because it will be good for them, I'm never going to do it because it shows them they're not thinking about what's good for me. And you always have to show that you're thinking about what's good for all the people around you without even a single thought about what's good for you.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.